again, thank you for coming. And I'd like to introduce Robert Lara and Austin Franklin and ask them to tell us a little bit about themselves and their practice and go from there. So we'll get you to start and then we'll figure out what's going on with Austin.
Sure. Hi, everybody. My name is Robert Lara. I'm New Mexico Statewide Alumni Chapter, McManus Chapter, University of Mexico School of Law. I happen to be one of the few attorneys I know who specializes in election law. I do the operational side of election law. So that means that if you're running for office or you're working with an organization or campaign that's dealing with the laws that govern elections on both the voting and how money influences elections, I'm the attorney you're calling to help you navigate the raising and expenditures of money, and also the act of soliciting votes for office and that sort of thing. I've been doing this since 2004, and I have worked on 3 presidentials, 6 Senate races, 36 House races, plus 15 statewide, a bunch of judge races and city councilor, dog catcher, whatever. Each one of those levels of election related activities has different laws and different regulations that govern them, be it federal, state, municipal, county, that sort of thing. And so it's a very niche area of law in some respects, but it's also something that's gotten a lot of attention recently. Whatever side you were on in the last presidential election law attorneys were at the forefront of all the drama of counting votes, of spending money, of getting people out to register to vote. Many attorneys end up becoming candidates for office, whether it's judicial office or congressional office or presidential office or whatever. So understanding how these regulations and procedures affect you and your law license and the obligations as an attorney you have to your clients, you're representing them in these matters, is vital for how our democracy works. It's a passion of mine. And when I'm not doing this, I'm advising the 3rd Judicial District Court in Las Cruces, New Mexico as their staff attorney and all the judges there. And we hear a lot of election law cases. So looking forward to talking about it and answering your questions.
Great. Thank you, Robert. Austin, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your practice and some of your background?
Okay, well, I served 7 years. I'm on the government side. I served 7 years in the Office of Campaign Finance in the Washington, D.C. Office of Campaign Finance. I was in the enforcement division. So essentially dealing with campaign finance, there's a set of regulations that those who engage in political activity, those who want to run for office and have campaign committees, what we call principal campaign committees, there's certain regulations that they have to follow. And so when there was, I guess you would say, evidence that some of those regulations were violated, it would come to myself and a team of other attorneys, and we would investigate that. So for 7 years, I reviewed what was called reports of receipts and expenditures. Those are reports that have to be submitted on a regular basis by every campaign committee within our jurisdiction. So every jurisdiction is different. I was with the District of Columbia. You have offices similar to where I worked, and probably just about every state that has campaign finance laws. Some states don't have limits on their on contributions and what have you, but they still have an office where the information is entered. Because essentially what you want is, I think the body, the voters, they want to know where contributions are going. So even if you may be in a jurisdiction in which there aren't many laws that regulate how the money is spent or how you receive it, they do want it to be information, public information, to see how contributions are being spent. So that's what I did for 7 years. It really, to be fair, it really was a team of auditors that first reviewed these reports of receipts and expenditures. And once they found something that was in non-compliance, then it would come to the attorneys. So I did that for 7 years in Washington, D.C. Prior to that, I had worked in private practice, so that was at the time when I joined that office, I was wanting to get back into government work, and that's where I went in 2013, I believe. So yeah, so on my side, I see everything that gets filed by every committee. So not just individuals running for office, but even what you would call political action committees, independent expenditure committees. So all these other committees, I review that. I review those reports.
Great. So a question for both of you. How did you get into this field the field that you are in? And then what would you suggest other people do if they have an interest in doing their campaign finance or election law? How, are there classes, or how would you suggest they get into that? Do you want to start, Austin?
Yes, what I've seen time and time again, people who actually hold office now, they all start off volunteering. I know people who hold very high offices that when I first met them some 8 years ago, they were volunteers in different committees for different people, different campaigns rather. Some served as treasurers, some handled contract negotiations. The point is, I think that's the best place to start if you're looking. I mean, if you want to run for office, you don't have to do it that way. But if you want to understand the system in terms of wherever it's all about your jurisdiction. If you're trying to go local, state, federal, I don't know what your ambition is. But I think being around those committees, watching it, I guess you call it grassroots. When you first get that office space, if you're doing it out of an office space, and you see what it takes, all the rules that are surrounded in terms of receiving contributions and how to handle that money. Going to your local board of elections to first, cast to state that you're putting your hat in the race that I'm going to run for office, and then going to the office that handles the office that I used to work at, the campaign finance office, and letting them know that you're involved. Because generally, where I worked, we got a copy of your bank information, the bank where your committee was, where the funds were going, and we had subpoena power, so we could always. If need be, we could look at a lot of your financial transactions, how the committee was receiving its money, how it was spending its money, that sort of thing. So you learn all of that when you volunteer, depending if that's your interest. So I would say that's a very good place to start to kind of get a full understanding of what's going on in with respect to running a campaign.
What about you? How would you, if someone wants to get into election law in that field? How did you get in it, and how would you recommend other people kind of go about getting into that particular career field? Sorry, there he is.
I swear it's not me. It's Zoom.
Zoom is not your friend tonight.
All right, so I heard your question.
Okay.
Yeah. If you want to get involved in any kind of election law work, I think the first thing you need to ask yourself is, what do I want to do? Do I want to be helping somebody run for office as a candidate or a campaign officer? Do I want to run for office as a campaign person? And then contact your local candidate, political party, or regulatory agency and say, hey, I want to be a part of what you're doing. Can you show me? I got involved in election law quite by accident. They were looking for somebody who had a fundraising background. And so Phi Alpha Delta teaches you how to do that. And I happened to also be graduating from law school at the time. So I said, well, by the way, go raise money and then go figure out how to do the legal side of how we report money. So I had to learn early on how to do federal FEC regulations and campaigns for US Senate. As I progressed in that skill set, I got to learn about local races, judge races for Congress, races for state auditor, that sort of thing. And so you develop this skill set that many attorneys don't have no idea what it is. If for those of you who are on the call and are thinking about, hey, this might be a subset of my practice or something out that might benefit me personally later on, give me a call. I'm happy to connect you to folks I know in your area that practice in this area. It's a very small knit community, but we're always looking for people who want to learn how to do it, because tops nationwide, there's maybe 5 firms I can think of that do it and do it regularly. Everybody else is seasonal like me. My buddy decides to run for judge. and they call me. So I think it's definitely worth your while, and it's super technical and interesting and very civil procedure nerdy. So I think you'll enjoy it.
So what are some things that a person should think about before they decide to run for, or, if they decide to run for office, if they decide to run for office, if they're going to hire a campaign staff and start to do some fundraising, what are some issues and some things that they should really think about before they get started and plan for those types of issues?
In my opinion, what I see a lot of times, what gets people into trouble, but I understand, is that you tend to want to hire people that you trust. But sometimes I think it's really important that you not only have someone that you trust, but someone who actually has experience with respect to wherever position you're going to put them in. So I understand sometimes you're looking for volunteers, you're not in a position to pay them, and you want someone you trust, but it helps to have someone who might actually understand finance. Someone who may have experience with contracts, or at least contract negotiations. It might even help to have an attorney on board. I'm not saying you need to find a lawyer who might be, because it's such a small niche. I mean, someone who actually has experience with campaign finance, or even election law for that matter. But it may be an attorney who obviously knows where to go to where to find the answers for you. So I think I've seen that a lot. People entrusting their finances, their campaign finances, to someone who really doesn't have a background in accounting or campaign finance, and they make mistakes. And I think in most jurisdictions, like the one I worked in, it's like strict liability. So it really doesn't matter whether that was an honest mistake or not. You'll still be held accountable for the honest mistake if you do things with contributions that you're not supposed to do. So I would say that's very critical.
From my perspective, I think the first thing is, are you really ready to run for office? Most attorneys in Phi Alpha Delta are sole practitioners or medium firm practitioners. Very few of us are part of large multi-conglomerates. And so you're taking on basically a full-time job on top of practicing law. So are you really ready to do that? And are you ready to do that well? In order to win elected office, you're going to have to commit, just like you would for a jury trial or anything else. So are you ready to do it? And is your family ready to support you to do it as well? After you've figured out that you're ready to do it and you're in a position professionally to commit to it, the next thing is that who around you is going to help you? I 100% agree with Austin. I spend a majority of my time fixing people's problems when they ask their sister, cousin, uncle, nephew, whoever, to serve as treasurer for their campaigns. They didn't know what they were doing. And then the reports they filed were incorrect, or they spent money they shouldn't have, or they engaged in some election activity that was prohibited. And then we're in court, we're in administrative court, we're in the press, trying to handle whatever your situation is. So be ready to do it. Pick the race that speaks to your passions. You want to be a judge? Great. You want to be a congressman? Great. Figure that out. Get some really qualified people who've done it before, people who have the knowledge to do it, and who are willing to risk their own ethics and well-being, to promote you, and then get going. The one thing I see quite often is folks are like, well, I'm not the candidate, so it's not my problem. And like Austin said, the statute, I don't care what jurisdiction you're in, is never written that way. Your actions as a candidate are the same as if you acted as a treasurer, and vice versa. So you're both on the hook. And so you've got to really be careful as an attorney whether or not you're willing to put your law license on the line, practicing in an area of law that could have some serious ramifications if you mess up. So I think those are all considerations to have when you're thinking about this.
Great, thank you. What are some of the biggest issues you see affecting people's access to the democratic process, whether it's their access to voting, whether it's their access to running for office? What are some issues that both of you see in your fields that kind of prevent people or creating hurdles for people who either want to vote or run for office?
I served in this position. I served in the position with campaign finance from 2013 to 2020. I left that job. So I had 7 years straight of it. The biggest issue that always came up, and is money in politics. In terms of access, before I left, I was the attorney for a program. Well, I guess I don't know if it's public financing. It's something that's been around for a while. It's even actually it's on the federal level, but some local. I don't think it's used as much, and I don't think a lot of people opt into the program on the federal level. But the issue that has come up most is money, and I guess its place in our I guess election process. To run a campaign, you need money. Now it's all relative. I guess if you're trying to run a campaign in a large city like Washington, well, DC is not a large city, but perhaps say Chicago, New York City, something like that. The kind of funds that you would need to get your message out is probably, it's quite a sum of money. And so we need money. But I think the issue that I've always seen, to two sides that I always, working for the government, I didn't really take a position per se. I was neutral, but listening to the two competing arguments was, yes, you need money, but I think the argument has always been, are their interests being, I guess, drowned out or not being taken as serious by those running for office when they are receiving large amounts of sums of money from whether it be large corporations, developers, that sort of thing. Are their interests being playing second fiddle to the interests of the larger companies? So because I'm on the campaign finance side, I didn't really do much with the actual election. Like I didn't work for the Board of Elections. I didn't handle that. I handled more so the finances and how that was handled by the different committees. But that seems to be an issue that's been ongoing. I think that's going to be a conversation for quite some time. And that's what I would say is something that I think most people have strong opinions on.
I think definitely money in politics is always an issue, and whatever side of the coin you're on, how do we pay for campaigns? What should we pay for campaigns, and how do we control those costs? I did a Supreme Court race in New Mexico, $750,000 for a statewide race, and we spent that money on travel. That's gas up and down the state, mailings, and some TV time. I did a Supreme Court race in the state of New York. That was $7 million. Same costs, same. We spent it the same way. Just the cost of running in a larger market or a more competitive market, influences that race. And where are you getting that money from, and how are you doing it? I raise money for a living when I'm not being a lawyer, and I can tell you right now that the number one thing that we need for campaign finance reform is public financing that works, so that candidates can spend more time talking about how they're going to fix the roads and put the lights on in your kitchen, and less time on the phone asking Robert Lara Incorporated for contribution. Every candidate I've ever worked for, regardless of the level of the race, has always hated having to ask for money, because that's the majority of what we do. Because to get the vote out, you need to get on TV, get on the radio, send out letters, door knock, that sort of thing. So I'm all about public financing at whatever level it is. It creates better policy, in my opinion. The flip side of campaigns are the issues dealing with election law. How do we protect the fundamental right of Americans to vote? How do we make sure that your vote is counted? How it's secure? How can we validate that whole democratic process? Some states have gone very, very far on the strict end, and are demanding voter ID and all sorts of other measures, to that affect our populace who don't have access to some of these verifiers, and so it limits voting. Other states are much more broad in their inclusiveness, in my opinion, and they want everybody to vote, and so they make multiple mechanisms to cast that ballot. At the end of the day, we want it to be like it was in school, right? Raise your hand, and the more hands up for pizza versus hamburgers is what you're going to get. And so being able to verify that vote is important. Lawyers play a unique role in both how do we pay for campaigns and how do we protect the vote, because we're the ones who are going to draft the laws that affect those two issues. And we're also the ones that are going to argue, what is my right to vote? What is my right to freedom of speech? Is money speech? Should we have a national ID requirement to vote? Should we have a national vote by mail campaign? How you do all that stuff. I think regardless of the political spectrum that you sit on, the fundamental issue is, how do we make it so that the playing field is as level as possible, so that when Michelle decides she wants to run for Senate, she can afford to do it. The laws are set up so that she's able to do it, and that the playing field is the same if it's Michelle versus Robert for the same Senate race. Historically, we've seen election law and campaign finance law is not level. It's set up to benefit one side versus the other. And so it's a constant balancing act, just like it is in every other area of the law that we practice in. How do we make it so that it's fair for everybody? Those are very esoteric, very general policy discussions I'm having with you right now. But the nitty-gritty details, do we do voting by mail? Should we have voter ID, and what kind of ID does that count? What is the limit of money I'm going to spend on Michelle's campaign for Senate versus Robert's campaign for judge? All those operational details are what you as lawyers need to get involved with, so we have a better system.
We have.
I'm sorry, Michelle.
Go ahead, Austin.
I just wanted to say, I wasn't clear. I guess for those who aren't familiar with the term public financing, it's essentially the jurisdiction in which you live. It could be your state, your city, that sort of thing. They could have a law on the books, essentially creating a program in which politicians would agree that they would not accept any contributions from corporations. They would only stick to receiving monies from what we call small donors, just people. And they would be capped at that, but the government would have basically money set aside that would match it. Now the ratio changes, sometimes it changes looking at how much it costs to run a campaign in a given city or a given area. And it's like for one time, I think when we first started in DC, I think it might've been for every $1, the government matched it $5. So that's how they match it, to try to give you a chance, essentially, to say you can run a competitive race without having to rely upon getting the backing or monies from corporations. And a lot of major candidates who already had, were very recognizable within the city, they opted in to show good faith that they could run their campaign without the assistance of developers or any large company. So, like I said, that does exist in the federal government, but it's not really, not many people opt into it. I don't think a lot of people have ever really done it. But that is in that sense, what public financing is.
Great, thank you. One of our attendees would like to hear more of your thoughts on the movement towards election law reform, either broad opinions nationally or specifically to the jurisdictions within which you work.
I didn't see a lot of election, reform. Once again, I didn't work in that area, number one. And number two, I think it's pretty progressive where I was. So there was always a lot of, conversation about different ways or better ways to get people more involved. Time and time again, you'd have citywide elections. And I can't recall the exact percentage, but it really wasn't a lot of the elections. I don't know if we had 50% of voter turnout. And I think there was always a conversation of what needs to be done. And I think this is one thing that I thought was pretty cool. Everyone was talking about this idea of voting on your cell phones, that, when trying to reach a younger demographic, perhaps some people, young, and I don't want to put that on, this idea of, young people, but it was the idea that why do people have to physically get up and go to vote at the polls, when we definitely, people felt we had the technology for people to vote with their cell phones at the house. Of course, there's issues of fraud. Some people were concerned about that, but that was a debate I recall kind of gaining some steam in the DC area back when I was there. And I was like, wow, okay, maybe one day it'll get to that. But just trying to make it as accessible to people to vote. on that day, on election day. So that was some of the things. But I think this is more in Robert's wheelhouse.
Thank you, Austin. Yeah, there's all sorts of reforms that are being proposed or have been proposed. One of the side effects of COVID on our society and voting culture has been, how do we allow people the right to vote and access to the right to vote in a safe and secure manner when we have a virus that's as virulent as it's been? Some jurisdictions that I worked in said, well, we'll just keep doing what we're doing, no worries, and that's it, and we'll just take our chances. Other jurisdictions listened to what healthcare workers recommended, and they modified voting, but they still had the same basic structure. You show up to the firehouse, you cast your ballot, and you go home, and that's it. Other jurisdictions I worked in went the totally innovative route and started doing brand new ways of how to help people cast votes. I live on the border of El Paso County, Texas, and Diana County, New Mexico. I'm literally like 3 minutes from Texas and vice versa. So I live in New Mexico, I work in New Mexico, but my family's in Texas. So because of my specialty, I got in the last round of fun for the election cycle to participate in both states' voting reforms. In New Mexico, we argued before the Supreme Court that the Secretary of State's office should be allowed to send every registered voter in New Mexico a ballot by mail. That it was the safest way we felt would allow everybody a chance to vote. It places the election worker at minimum to no risk for infectious contact with the public. And it's been proven in New Mexico, at least, to be a safe and secure method of voting. The Supreme Court felt that our argument, while it had merit in the middle of a pandemic, the statute didn't allow for that type of reform. So in New Mexico, the law is that if you want an absentee ballot sent to you, that's what we call them by mail, you have to request it and you get it and that's it. But it's not like in Texas. In Texas, we argued the same thing should happen, but the Texas statute says that if you want to vote by mail, you have to have a reason to vote by mail and have to prove to the local county clerk's office why you need one. You're in a wheelchair, you're in a hospital, whatever. So we argued that for pandemic purposes, that reason-based methodology should be waived and everybody should get one in the mail anyway. Both jurisdictions ended up modifying the way they allowed access to the vote. In Texas, they had drive-through centers, they had drop boxes. A lot more people registered, asked for the ballot by mail. In New Mexico, we did the same things here. And the idea was just, now that we're not past the pandemic, right? We're still dealing with these issues, but now that it's not as concentrated as it was in the last election, which one of these measures do we continue? There is a bill floating in the New Mexico legislature to make voting by mail a permanent option that's more accessible without having to ask for it. It's just an automatic, we're sending you one. Other jurisdictions are taking that up too. Other jurisdictions are turning to the Texas model where they're restricting that option and actually placing more verification safeguards in their words on voting access. All of that super nerdy election stuff that I'm talking about, but it has fundamental impacts on us as attorneys. Your right to vote is sacrosanct. It is the one right that's litigated the most in this country. And if you want to be a litigator, if you want to be a policymaker, get involved in this type of work, and I guarantee you're going to be in a court somewhere arguing out what your jurisdiction should be doing. In addition to voting access, Citizens United is a wonderful case recently in the last 10 years where we revamped what it is to have freedom of speech in this country, which includes spending money and contributing to political campaigns. Whether you agree that we should have stricter limits or we should have broader limits, it's up for debate, right? But the point is that election laws keep on developing because we keep having new issues that face the populace and new ways to engage the community. Austin is 100% right. I've heard the cell phone argument for years. It's always fascinated me that the IRS can bill me over the phone, but I can't cast my ballot yet. So I would assume that eventually we're going to get to a point where we're voting this way via Zoom. We're just logging into a dedicated link and pressing the button on our computer and being done with it. And those technologies are being tested in some markets right now. So It's an interesting new digital age for us in election law.
One of the questions we have is, do you think extended voting periods affect election integrity or
We lost Michelle, I think. She froze. Austin, did she freeze for you too?
Yeah, she froze for me as well.
So,
okay.
there you are.
There,
She's back. She's back.
I'm back. Did you hear me? I can repeat it. Do either of you think that what do you call it? Extended voting periods? You know, many states did this across the country, gave us a longer period, and some were doing it anyway. I lived in California, and I'm now in Nevada, and we could vote instead of just one day of voting. We had an extended period where we could drop off our ballots. Do you think that those extended periods cause or have any effect on election integrity, or and if so, how?
I'll let Robert lead on this one. Go for it.
Sure. No. Taking election day from one day where you cast your vote on Tuesdays to a week or a month does not affect the integrity of the vote. You're going to get in theory, you're going to get a larger percentage of the population going to go vote because there's more opportunities to vote, right? But in practice, the number of votes we get for those 3 weeks versus that one day are going to average out depending on who's running and what type of cycle we're in and what are the issues that the jurisdiction that's voting is facing. Election integrity issues happen outside of the window to vote. They happen with how are votes counted, who's counting those votes, how are those votes stored, and what type of races you're being involved with. There's several actual examples of voter fraud for local races, and they had nothing to do with we had 10 days versus 3 days to vote. It had much more to do with who the county clerk was or what the process was to receive ballots in the mail and that sort of thing. So no, I haven't seen any cases where time frame affected integrity.
On that one, I agree with Robert. I'm always more inclined to get as many votes as possible, allowing people opportunity to cast their votes. They live there in a given jurisdiction. They want to vote. The idea, I guess, the issue of integrity. I have never, in the 7 years I worked there, and one of my other jobs was to, as part of that job, and I had done this job when I was in Chicago as an assistant attorney general. We go down to the polling stations and we would ask people about, as part of our job, to find out was there anything that they saw, any things going on that were illegal, anyone being pressured, anyone being prevented from casting their ballot, that kind of thing. And in all those years, whether it be Chicago, Washington, D.C., you just never saw that kind of thing. I never saw it, at least. I'm sure it existed. I'm just saying, from my point of view, my experience, I think that lends to why I'm always for an opportunity for everyone to cast their vote. And whatever's preventing them from going, during the times where the majority of us would vote, I don't know, but it doesn't matter to me. If they live there, they have a right to vote. And if you want to extend the time to them, that's fine. I think as you do it more, I think you will, if you do have challenges, I think different jurisdictions will find different ways to combat those challenges if it ever comes to light that there is some security issues with it. But I'm totally behind it.
Great, thank you. We have a pre-law member who's asked a couple questions. One of it, they say, I've struggled with is finding my vehicle of law. I want to study my interest and passion, and my interest and passions are diverse. So can you all speak on that, or stories if you ever struggled finding kind of your passion in law and what you want to practice? Austin, I know both you and Robert have kind of done a few different things in the law, and kind of if you want to talk about how did you find your passion for whatever you're practicing now, and what makes you kind of go back and forth between different kinds?
I can only just tell you what my experience was. My experience is sometimes you'll do a job, and for me, when something's new to me and challenging, that generally drives me. I want to learn that area of law that I'm in. In my background, I've done criminal law, I've done immigration, I've done campaign finance, I've done employment, I have to think. But I mean, you just go. My thing is when you get to a point in any area of law where you feel you've kind of you can never master any area of law, but you feel at least within that job that you need a challenge. That's kind of what's happened with me. I would just move on to something else. With respect to passion, I think different things motivate different people. For me, it's just doing a good job and really getting to that point where I feel like I'm seasoned and I know what I'm doing really well. That tends to drive me, if that makes sense. So it's just like, it's kind of circular, like, I want to do something that I'm good at. So I'm driven to get really good at it. And then once I get pretty good at it, then I might say, well, let me try another one. Let me, something else. And sometimes in my career, it's been through other people I went to law school with who told me, you might want to try this, or why don't you look into this, or come with me to court and watch this, that sort of thing. So, that was just my experience. I understand what you're saying is you have so many different interests, and, being an attorney, there's so many obviously areas of law to practice in. What I would say is, number one, one thing I don't like to hear is when some people say, if you get into one field, you'll be stuck in that field. I've never agreed with that, just given my career and others that I know. So if you have different interests, I would say the first one that you can get your foot into, get into. And at some point in time, if you don't ever feel that fear of, if I get into one field, will I ever be able to dabble or, pursue some of these other fields? I think you do have a chance if you focus and you figure out how to get into that field, you can. So that's my 2 cents on that. But my background's a little bit different. So, but I just think before you're done practicing, I think you do have a chance to at least experience some of the fields of practice that you have interest in.
I echo Austin's sentiment. Do what speaks to your heart, what makes you happy. Money is not going to make you happy. So don't go after that first job that pays a ton of money. Go after that first job that benefits you in your mind and your heart, that gets you the motivation to want to keep going to that job. And you're going to find in your career that you're going to have different areas of specialty and different turns. I started out as a teacher, and then I ended up going to law school. And after law school, I was a foreclosure attorney. I've worked for the federal government. I've worked for the state. I've worked for the Democratic Party. I've worked for a multinational firm. I've done all sorts of fun stuff because I would be at a job for a while. I'd enjoy it. And then this other opportunity would come by and say, oh, that looks cool. Let's try that. Now, there are some detriments to that type of career plan. I'm sure some of the long-term attorneys will tell you that if you want to be a Supreme Court clerk, that's probably not the path that's going to be best suited for you. Or if you wanted to be a family law judge, probably don't need to be a tax attorney, although it would help. The point is, though, is just between now and when you get out of law school, there's going to be so many doors that are going to be available to you. Try the ones that you like, and you'll find at the end of the road something that really impacts you. But don't be afraid to say, okay, well, I've been a civil rights attorney for 20 years. I want to go represent children. Go do it. I mean, you only have one career, so make it your career. And utilize the P.A.D network as best you can to find opportunities and mentors and the things that you want to learn. And eventually you'll find your passion. And once you find that job that you really, really love, you're going to stick with it. And so don't worry about that. You'll get it.
Robert, can you build on using the P.A.D network to find, because you've been a district justice and you've been around the fraternity for a while, and this person's question also says, how can they use P.A.D to kind of help them find the right programs within law school and even funding opportunities? Can you address some of how to use Phi Alpha Delta to get those questions answered and help?
Yeah, that's a multifaceted question. But what I learned is I got to open my mouth and ask. And so let me give you the example. You know, I ended up getting a clerkship my second summer in law school with the U.S. Consumer Product Safety Commission in Washington. So I emailed the P.A.D listserv and said, hey, I'm coming to DC for the summer. Can somebody show me around? Can I have lunch with somebody? What's the deal? And I got multiple answers from Curtis Anderson and, you know, Tom Bentz and, you know, all these folks in the fraternity who work in DC at the time and who did different things. And I went to lunch with them. I talked about their careers. I talked about the kind of laws they were practicing. They introduced me to other people, etc. And so when I got out of law school and I was looking for that first job, I had a little bit of a network where I could call and say, hey, I'm graduating. Can you help me out? Other things that came up, you know, I was going to go do the P.A.D mock trial one year, and I was a law student, didn't have any money to go make the trip. I contacted the alumni in our area and said, hey, would you sponsor a team from McManus to go from our law school? And yeah, lawyers were more than happy to give me 20 bucks, 50 bucks, whatever. So me and my teammates could go and do this thing. Now that I'm an attorney and I'm making tons of money as a state worker, you know, whenever something comes up, I'll call Michelle, I'll call Austin, I'll call whoever is on the P.A.D listserv and say, hey, have you ever had this kind of case? You know, if you don't, if you had, how do you handle it? And if you don't, do you know somebody who could help me? Or if I wanted to move to New Hampshire, say, and get a job, I'm pretty sure I could email the listserv and say, hey, I'm moving, I'm looking for a job in these areas. Can somebody point me in the right direction? Very often, Phi Alpha Delta attorneys will email me and say, hey, we need an attorney in the Southwest. I currently have a client who's running for Congress in Georgia. And the reason I have that client is one of their friends is a P.A.D member in Atlanta who asked the listserv, is there anybody who does FEC regulatory work? This guy wants to run for Congress. And so I ended up getting a client out of that. And so, I mean, just as a law student, we all are here to help you. So as a pre-law student as well. So pick up the phone, send an email, go on Facebook, whatever, and ask. And we're happy to talk. Lawyers love to talk about themselves. We're also happy to listen and try to point you in the right direction because somebody helped all of us. So now it's our turn to help you.
Austin, do you have any thoughts on that, or have you had successes networking with Phi Alpha Delta?
Oh, definitely. When I first joined Phi Alpha Delta, I remember just certain members taking me under their wing and taking me to, I remember Rotary clubs in Washington, D.C. that I had never been to. And within meeting a guy, I remember, I mean, I think I went to one P.A.D meeting where I met this individual, and he brought me into a few of the Washington, D.C. Rotary clubs where there were tons of lawyers. And he took it upon himself to introduce me to these different individuals. So a lot of times it's just being there, going to the brunches, going to different things, being yourself, engaging in conversation. Because when I normally go to some sort of function for P.A.D, I just go. I don't necessarily there's no game plan. You just meet people, and after a while, you know people, and before you know it, you don't know who you meet and who they know, and you don't know what certain people are willing to do for you, even when you're really not even thinking about it. You know, there were times which I wasn't thinking about anything career-wise or a career move, and just certain people saw something, they saw an interest. I did have the interest, and they will put you into contact with people that can really be helpful for you. So I would say the first thing is just, essentially placing yourself in the room, even now during this virtual time, showing up to things on Zoom. If there are in-person events that you feel comfortable attending, go to those. And just knowing people and increasing, I guess they call it your social capital, the people that you know, you'll be on your way in P.A.D. You just never know which P.A.D member, who they know, who's a friend of theirs, and they're not, they'll be wide open to introducing you to that individual.
We have time for one more question. There's one, how worried are both of you about the impact of conspiracy theories pushed by some will have on the election process and democracy overall? I mean, is that concerning, or, are there organizations that, and I'm going to add on it, are there organizations that people can get involved in to kind of help the election process and the democratic process?
I'll say from my experience, when we're investigating, like say when I was investigating campaign finance violations or alleged violations, it came from documents, reports that were submitted that have to be submitted to the office where auditors reviewed them, and then, then I would be notified if something was off. But a lot of other things came from the public. The public have every right, and that a lot of investigations came from the public. So sometimes when you read some of the claims and some of the things that they think is happening with funds, they think where the source of funds, what the source is, you see that sort of thing. I don't think that will ever change. I think it's always been here. In terms of an impact, I don't know what control we could have of that, and I don't really know how I can measure the impact. I guess everyone has a strong voice now due to social media and the internet. So people with certain thoughts and viewpoints obviously can get online and post it and, kind of preface it as it being fact versus any kind of conspiracy. And unfortunately, others sometimes take it as fact, as truth. So it does have a negative impact at times, but I've seen a lot of it, but I've always seen it. And I imagine it was always there, people having different conspiracies about certain things when it comes to politics. So with that being the case, I think it'll always be there and it will have its impact. It will have its place. Maybe now than ever, it's louder because everybody, seems to have a podcast. Everybody's putting things online, but yeah, I don't know if that's ever going to change. I don't know if it's ever going to go anywhere.
I think anytime we have anybody questioning a legal process and its validity, it's a danger to the judiciary and it's a danger to the profession. Everything can always be better, right? Like you can have better voting, better security, better this, better access, etc. But when you start saying that, your vote doesn't count, or the machines are all voting for Ross Perot and not for, whoever, and that's a dated reference, but there we go. It undermines people's confidence in the democracy. The way we combat it, from whatever perspective you're in, is to be involved in the process. So on election night, I want to see you guys who are on the call in the county clerk's offices monitoring the vote. I want to see you all at the courthouse petitioning the court to keep that precinct open because the power lines turned off that day, or arguing that Michelle's contribution to Robert is legally permissible, because it's her right to freedom of speech, or whatever your position is going to be. That's how we defend democracy, as we participate in it. Ways to be a part of it are to either join your respective political party or candidate. There's an organization that I've worked with for years called Common Cause. It's a non-partisan organization, and their sole purpose is to monitor the vote and make sure that everybody has access. I'm sure there is they would probably be classified as a liberal organization. So I'm sure there's a conservative organization that complements them as well. So, but look online to see how you as the attorney can get involved. But yes, anytime there's a question about the integrity of voting rights and voting access, it threatens the legitimacy of who's in charge and what policies they're making. And that's not healthy for anybody.
Great, thank you. So Austin and Robert, I want to thank both of you for coming on and sharing your expertise and your thoughts. We really appreciate it. Thank you to everyone who came on as a participant. This will be available, the recording will be available on the File for Delta YouTube site, probably in a week or so. So take a look at that. There's plenty of other past webinars on the same site. Take a look at those. Our next webinar will be October 5th, and that's going to be on alcohol and beverage law and topics concerning that field. So we invite you to that, and keep a lookout for webinars. We'll take a break in December, but we'll be back in January with some great topics. I hope you all have a great evening. Thank you again, Austin and Robert. Good night, everybody. Thank you.